Periscope closing. So I hope everybody who's used to listening to me on Periscope has found me on Haps, because that's where I am right now. Haps allows you to broadcast live to multiple destinations: Periscope, Twitch, Facebook, although I don't have Facebook, other places, YouTube. So this is where I am. This is where I'm going to be for the foreseeable future. There's actually some great technology on Haps, and I've recently discovered how to use the present button, which allows me to share media from external sources. So I can share a small video with relation to a documentary called Q Into the Storm that's been produced, highlighting what it is that America is suffering from. Whoopsies. So let's see. What I'll be doing today is just going through some of the ways in which Q is a cult that has caused people to take leave of their senses, to cease dealing with empirical evidence in almost any way, shape or form whatsoever. The fact that that endangers children in their care, because they're so convinced that there are hundreds of thousands of children who were being rescued by Trump, that Trump is possibly still running the US government and running all these secret rescue missions for which there is no evidence. There are no freed children. Trump habitually do things and then fail to take credit for them because he's so super modest. But I think it's a function. People's vulnerability to Q is a function of their hunger for broader meaning in their life, and possibly for wanting to not be wrong about Trump. Possibly it's an escape route from contending with the fact that Trump was really harmful to the interests of the American people. So people who can't cope with recognizing they were mistaken about the quality of a president and have instead fled via this carefully cultivated psychological escape route from reality to a place where they can claim everything you say against Trump is made up, and the truth is far more sinister, that the Democrats are secretly trafficking children together with people from Hollywood, and it's all this huge conspiracy. And there are so many secret indictments, 55,000 secret indictments of Democrats and Hollywood stars, and it's all just bubbling away under the surface. What's bubbling away under the surface is their refusal to deal with reality. Their refusal to accept that Trump was a thief and a con artist who extrapolated the hunger for simplicity amongst people who feared that maybe male-female attributes were out of whack because 9/11 and any subsequent terror attacks on the United States and elsewhere had proven to some that it was too costly to be compassionate and accepting of migrants. Those people had taken on board the message that there was a cost to being welcoming, accommodating, and acknowledging the contributions of migrants to American society. The fact that migration has been a driving factor in American excellence, American innovation, American entrepreneurial growth, and subsequently employment levels and wealth levels for those in the population who were able to benefit from their proximity to migrants with good business ideas, and that kind of drive that people often intensify in themselves when they move to a new country and commit themselves to improving the quality of life for themselves and their children. So they abandon the comforts and familiarity of their home origin country and they go to America because of that promise of facilitating business startups, that idea that in America you can pursue a goal and have it actualized, that you can marry your ambition and drive to circumstances that are conducive to business startups. Christopher says hi. Marsha says hi. And Clark has just subscribed and makes a point that, yes, those people who subscribe to the QAnon cult are stuck in the first stage of grief, denial. And that grief has metastasized into something quite toxic, dangerous, very absorbing. And it's probably very familiar to psychiatrists who work with people who have taken one delusion and then constructed their whole identity around that delusion, and are often unrecognizable to people who used to know them or be friends with them, because they have committed their psyches wholesale to accepting something that no longer bears any relationship to truth. So let's see, what I wanted to bring up is a little video that's an extract from this documentary. So I've got it here. It's airing, well, it aired tonight on HBO, which I don't have and I didn't watch, but I'm still eager to share this extract just as a point of reference for this conversation. It's 30 seconds long. So let's see if I can add that to the screen like that. Oh, look at that, perfectly shared screen. I'm going to press play.
What had started in an online forum had crawled out from behind the screen. In 2018, I set out to chart QAnon's origins.
You can really find yourself falling down a hole trying to find out who Q is.
Dangerous ideas. That's a scary idea.
It seems like Q's gone mainstream.
What did we conspire against? The lunatics running the asylum.
What had started in an online forum had crawled out behind.
So that is some footage from the sacking of the Capitol, or the Capitol riot as it's mostly called. I think some people make the argument that you shouldn't use the term riot. That's playing into the hands of various Republicans who want to minimize what happened and make it seem just an impulsive misstep on the part of some overly enthusiastic Trump supporters, whereas in reality, it was far more planned for and far more purposefully and deliberately incited by Trump and his cronies in the Republican Party. His complicit cronies like Senator Josh Hawley, Senator Ted Cruz, Representative Mo Brooks, all of the many, many Republicans who perpetuated the big lie, as it's commonly known now, the big lie that Trump won the election and that he was robbed of that legitimate outcome by Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, working to subvert the operations of various voting machine equipment, such as that equipment sold by Dominion, the company Dominion, and the company Smartmatic, both of whom have been at least a force for good in terms of suing the Fox News personalities, including the MyPillow guy, Mike something, because that legal remedy is helping to assert reality to some of the oops, pressed the wrong button. So that removes it. Okay. I'm familiarizing myself with this. It's great. We've got Donald saying hello from Copenhagen. Hello, Donald from Copenhagen. So if you're familiar with my work, you'll know that I've been broadcasting on Periscope for 3 years, just offering up what I can to keep Americans cheerful and to center truth, because when you're under authoritarian style leadership, they typically employ strategies termed the fire hose of spectacle. No, the fire hose of lies, which involves generating so much fabricated spectacle and outrage, as well as real spectacle and outrage in terms of the example of the very real outrage of children being separated from their parents in the 2018 scandal that the Trump administration were purposely causing trauma and grief and loss and exposure to violence, be it sexual violence or physical assault or even pharmaceutical violence, when you forcibly drug young children to prevent them from being vocal about their pain and distress at being left to fend for themselves in a detention center. That generates massive profits for the kind of Trump donors who were able to charge the government and therefore taxpayers over $700 per child per day that they spent in detention facilities in America. But yes, so pharmaceutical violence, when you administer psychotropic drugs to children in distress and teenagers. There was circumstances that are suggestive of genocide when people from one particular demographic group, namely South American nations, were not only separated from their parents, but were then put into the adoption system by those complicit Trump officials in ICE or in CBP. And that behavior on the part of those officials doing that bidding to separate small children from their parents. Some US attorney generals had shown some discomfort with that and were recorded as saying on a call with Deputy Attorney General at the time, Rod Rosenstein, are we even to separate? Surely we're not to take away very young children from their parents, because those children won't even know their parents' names, and surely we won't do that. And Rod Rosenstein said, no, there's no exception for an age basis. And that learning that he said that, and that he was very insistent that there would be no age-based exception to this policy of deterring migrants by acting in such a unequivocally cruel way, by taking even breastfeeding 4-month-old babies from their caregivers and from their parents, that would still be embraced by the administration because the cruelty was the point. Donald just survived as well, which I'm grateful for. Thank you, Donald. I know I've only got 8 more days left of access to my habitual Periscope audience, and I don't know if all of them are aware I'm switching to HAPS. So it's good to hear that some people are finding me and some people are subscribing. Not that self-importance should be a driving factor for what I do. I've been doing it for years now. And whilst I welcome the opportunity to engage with people in a positive way, life goal ticked off of preventing, or at least feeling that I was a minor cog in the wheel of millions of people, a high voter turning out to oust a destructive despot from office. And people have pointed out that, yes, a significant misstep he made was alienating educated people and people from suburbia who had enough education to be able to recognize that he was lying about COVID, that he was representing contradictory viewpoints that seemed to serve his own convenience but not protect people from a amplification of the virus. Now, it's interesting. I do often notice on the left that there is sometimes an overestimation of the risks involved in relation to COVID. And I'm not going to say underestimation, actually. I'm going to say a misattribution, because with COVID, the risks have always been concentrated in static populations. So not just elderly people, but people trapped where they have to be in indoor spaces. They don't easily have access to fresh air, and they're very contained. So people in prison populations, those people aren't weighted towards the elderly, but they are more likely to have contracted COVID, and therefore, statistically speaking, a portion of those people with COVID have been hospitalized, and a portion of those hospitalized people have subsequently died. So captive populations are really those most at risk, whether they be in nursing homes or prisons. There's the risk factor has always been, if COVID is spread too broadly across the population, that necessarily results in a concentration of risk for people who are captive, who can't get away from close proximity to others easily, or at least without lots of careful planning. And human beings being what they are, it sometimes takes a while for health messaging to get through, that you can't have large indoor gatherings, or that you have to wear masks and have open windows as much as possible to maintain levels of air turbulence that mix up air particles and so don't allow for a concentration of viral particles in an airstream just get blown across the room in a straight line by air conditioning streams. So yes, COVID and the inadequate response and the actively malevolent sabotage level of response to COVID from the Trump administration and his cronies in the Republican Party who sought to legitimize the Trumpian approach by acting in concert with it, acting to outlaw mask mandates or acting to reopen businesses and restaurants and bars before advised to do so by epidemiologists or virologists or airflow scientists who were able to generate warnings saying this disease is clearly airborne and steps have to be taken to protect people from concentrated airstreams within closed indoor environments. Those steps involve improving air quality, allowing for a refreshing of the air inside any room, and wearing masks protectively so that you lower the chance of either transmitting or contracting the virus. I see a lot of people commenting that Democrats have erred too much on the side of caution in terms of supporting ongoing school closures and failing to acknowledge the harms that accrue to children who are prevented from social contact with their friends. I don't live in the United States, so my children have been able to attend school for some time now. They wear masks. Their interaction with other classes is limited. There's been measures introduced to contain the risk of broadly disseminating this contagious disease. And I know that's been beneficial for their social development as well as their educational engagement. Because it is hard, particularly when parents are working. It is hard to maintain a level of task focus. It's hard for children to feel that they're operating within any level of social pressure. And by that, I mean that kids whose parents are telling them to do something can get locked into a power struggle dynamic where they feel resistance and the need to assert their own autonomy and to refuse to do tasks. Whereas in a classroom where everybody's obeying a teacher, there's far more positive levels of social pressure where you just comply with instructions because you can see that that's what everybody's doing. You are not being individually picked on. So some children benefit or find some benefits from homeschooling with that whole online learning thing in terms of they might be more likely to get individual focused attention. But I think we can acknowledge that that's still relatively rare compared to the broader disadvantages associated with school closures in a purely educational and social sense. And I'm not talking about a public health sense. But we know as well that public health and social health are linked. So there are psychological downsides with being out away from a shared school environment. So what else do I want to cover today? So we've talked about Q. We've talked about the downsides associated with school closures, but we should also mention the upsides associated with school closures in that people have been waiting for clarity. There's been differences of scientific opinion, and it's always hard to establish when you can't experiment within a lab setting. You can only do observational studies in a real world setting where you can't readily control variables, and there are so many factors, it becomes very difficult to hone in on what is contributing to success or failure in relation to COVID rates. So two of the main areas that have been highlighted for transmission of COVID have been school and work. And people in essential jobs, particularly people working in factories where there's close proximity, those people have suffered, and there's been evidence of high levels of almost sociopathic disinterest in the health of workers. So people who were management level operators in a meat factory who took bets on how many of the workers would fall sick. I better look up what was the name of that factory, because with naming people comes accountability. So awareness and attention leads to accountability and leads to deterrence, because exposure and shame for those type of practices can lead to support for a reform of working practices, or support for unionization of workers, so that people in legislative positions can get out of the way and stand back and let unions happen, let people organize so that there is a counterweight to the interests of employers, so that employees have some collective power, even though the employers have a concentration of funds. Yes, it's important for people's safety to have those two forces in a reasonable balance, so that not only do employers feel incentivized to start businesses and employ people, but that employees can feel, and with good grounds for doing so, can feel that they are protected, can feel that their interests play a significant role in risk-benefit calculations for employers. Okay, so meat packing factory management bets. It was Tyson food managers bet on how many workers might get COVID-19. So what I can do is just share that screen with you all so you can briefly see the story on the BBC. Let's see. Share screen. Done. But it's going to be a little hard. Nope. How can I? Oh, well, I don't think I can bring across the whole. I can just make it entirely the full screen for a moment, I guess. Nope. Okay. There we go. Tyson food managers bet on workers getting COVID-19, lawsuit says. This is from the 19th of November last year. So there was a lawsuit filed claiming the company demonstrated wanton disregard for worker safety. More than 1,000 workers were infected amid the plant's outbreak. Tyson called for an investigation. 5 employees at the Waterloo, Iowa factory died. The company was advised by the county sheriff to close the plant as infection spread this spring, but it did not. Tony Thompson, the Black Hawk County Sheriff, said the facility's working conditions shook him to the core. Around this time, defendant Tom Hart, the plant manager of the Waterloo facility, organized a cash buy-in, winner-take-all betting pool for supervisors and managers to wager how many employees would test positive for COVID-19. So this bet is taking place in a context in which they are disregarding advice to close the plant because of the rise in infections. And that microcosm story is very, very notable in a context of general hostility to workers' rights, general emotional detachment from the outcomes for people in relatively low-paying jobs. All right. Thank you for your patience waiting with me to get that back up on screen and get myself back up on screen. I'm learning my way around HAPS, and I'm really pleased with what's available at the moment. So that's good. So let's see. I'm searching for a word to describe that level of not caring that is evidenced by betting on how many workers will fall sick, whilst simultaneously ignoring advice to take steps to safeguard them. So preservation of profit for that company, Tyson Food, at the expense of the potential of those workers to survive their employment term. And look, Democrats are in charge and of the federal government now, and we can see that there's been a massive increase in terms of how many Americans are being vaccinated each day. We can see that who you vote for makes a difference in terms of having an actual plan and not just pretending that big government is inherently bad and that states should just haphazardly organize for vaccine distribution themselves. There's a reason people pay federal taxes, but Republican ideology and libertarian ideology has for such a long time worked to undermine and to just get rid of people's faith in the idea of big government actually doing something with the taxes that you pay to the federal government. They haven't done that much to actually stop you paying federal tax, but they've definitely helped collectively reduce the amount of faith that people have. And I'm going to suggest one reason for that. Big government brought in various changes to American society. It brought in civil rights progress that not only elevated the status of Black Americans, but that helped create public education, helped shore up the rights for all Americans residing in the United States. That was a coattails effect of progress for elevating Black Americans from the second citizen tier status that they were left in after Reconstruction failed. So Reconstruction was big government. Reconstruction was national troops in southern states there to ensure that Black Americans and newly freed slaves were not persecuted out of vengeance for losing the Civil War and vengeance for daring to have escaped that economic system that generated massive wealth for white Southerners, that idea of enslaving other human beings and generating substantial profit by not having to pay your workforce and instead reaping all of the profit that their labor helps to generate, and keep all that profit and have some of that profit passed on to adjacent industries, thus lifting everybody's boats if you were white in the South and in the North too, before abolition became more of a force in northern states. Oh, insensitivity, that's a good word, Marsha, thank you. That's harking back to what I was saying about the insensitivity of the management in Tyson Foods to the plight of employees. So Tom Hart was the name of the plant manager of the Waterloo facility in Iowa. And I just want to say that name again because, and I'll say the name of the Tyson Foods chairman, that's John Tyson, a CEO, Noel White, local managers Cody Brustkern and John Casey. Mr. Casey is alleged to have explicitly directed supervisors to ignore symptoms of COVID-19. COVID-19 symptoms are very broad and do overlap with a lot of ailments that people get on a frequent basis, such as colds. And I know it's hard. As a parent, I have to get a certificate for my children if they sneeze, if they exhibit signs of a cold, in order to be able to return to school. And that's because COVID has that significant overlap with the symptoms of mild respiratory illnesses. And we have also the idea that even relatively asymptomatic carriers of COVID can contribute to the burden of disease transmission. Those innocent sneezes, maybe a mild case of COVID, and cause an accumulation of COVID in a community, which could lead to the death of somebody vulnerable. And in Brazil, they have so under-responded to COVID under the leadership of Bolsonaro, a Trump-style right-wing despotic ruler who told Brazilians to stop whining. And now their healthcare system, which was apparently very good, is collapsing under the burden of so many COVID admissions, people with respiratory problems who are struggling to breathe, who have severe cases of COVID, and so that even lots of younger people now are also dying in Brazil. And it's a tragedy. And Bolsonaro is just now placing orders for vaccines that will take months to be fulfilled, and that will still likely be far too late for large numbers of the Brazil population. So we're looking at the costs of insensitivity to others, and also the fact that there were gains by being more sensitive, by recognizing the rights of African Americans to a greater extent during the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act was passed. That helped lift everyone who had the space for their status, their personal status, to improve. I mean, if you're already white and very wealthy, then you might not appreciate people's status being lifted, because you might then have a less captive population that will agree to work for you under conditions which favor profit generation for you, but don't favor their quality of life. So in America, conditions have kept the minimum wage quite low in a number of different states, and the federal level of assured minimum wage has also stayed low. So what is it, $7 an hour is the federally mandated minimum wage, and it's been proposed that should be raised to $15 an hour. But there's still some political ill will towards that, or political caution, as evinced by Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema and West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, both Democrats, but both cautious about raising the minimum wage, or at least they were cautious about attaching that minimum wage provision to the omnibus bill that was recently pushed through the Senate, circumventing the filibuster mechanism by virtue of using a budget reconciliation measure that allows some things to be passed with a simple majority, provided it's deemed to be essential to the budget. So that was the Biden rescue package that has involved a huge change for people in poverty, who will be receiving thousands of dollars of stimulus measure money if they have children, if they extra money if they were receiving unemployment benefits, and just also $1,400 if they've already filed their tax returns. So it's important to file your tax return to be eligible for those payments, I believe. But it was suggested that that's going to eliminate child poverty in the United States by half, which is really important, because people languishing in poverty are often emotionally browbeaten by the assertions that, look at other people who've lifted themselves up by their bootstraps, why can't you? A saying which doesn't give any credence to the fact that it's much more difficult to lift yourself up by your bootstraps. If your wages are so starvation level, you have to hold down 2 or 3 jobs to merely pay your bills and keep food on the table, and you cannot spend time with your children to help them do their homework, and you cannot have downtime where you strengthen your family bonds and eat ice cream together and relax, which makes divorce and family breakdown more likely, Those things in and of themselves are expensive, and it becomes much more difficult to save so that your child could go to college. It becomes much more difficult to ever own your own home so that you could potentially take out a second mortgage and leverage that home ownership you have into generating educative potential for your offspring, or even yourself if you wanted to return to school. So it really savages the social mobility of a society if you have such low minimum wages that people have to have their entire sleep-wake cycles consumed by multiple jobs. Indoor smokers say, hello, Dav, good evening. And Ninja Buddha, who makes the false assertion that raising the minimum wage would lead to people being replaced by kiosks, and ignores the fact that people in other societies, such as Australia, where we have a minimum wage that's much higher. I think or at least it was $17 at one point for casual work, but I presume it's higher now because it's been a while since I was a casual worker. That there are still McDonald's kiosks where you have to punch in your order into a computer front, a computer type screen. Technology and automatization is not a function of the minimum wage. So you can see that across different American states, where Seattle has a high minimum wage, but the price of a hot dog burger is from a fast food chain is similar to that in Washington, D.C., or other states with lower minimum wage. So your argument is symptomatic of a very broad misconception that deludes a lot of people in the United States, that they think raising the minimum wage would increase automatization by corporations. Nope, that's just something corporations do because they pursue profits. And as the technology becomes available, that's what happens. There has to be a strong federal government response to retraining and helping ease the situation of people whose jobs have been replaced by robots or computer consoles or kiosks. But there are still also things for people to do that are front-facing. There's still significant need for people to engage with each other in a way that keeps society healthy. People need human contact. So yes, automation will replace a lot of jobs, but there is also opportunity for other jobs, provided government subsidies and stimulus measures are conducted in helpful ways to help people transition to areas of need. You say, I obviously don't know how greedy American corporations are, but you agree with what I'm saying as well. I very much understand the nature of greed in American corporations, and not just greed, but the pursuit of profit in an unethical way that occurs at the direct expense of human beings. So I understand that greedy billionaires, such as the Christian theocratic Koch brothers, buy political influence to buy politicians who would vote for a relaxation of environmental protection measures so that people's water supplies would be poisoned by effluent from their factories, their toilet paper producing factories, and that people would grow sick and die as a consequence of the malevolent power of billionaires in America working to reduce the amount of expenditure on treating byproducts that would be toxic to humans, that didn't have to be toxic to humans, it didn't have to be released into people's waterways and airways in such a toxic state, but companies seeking to minimize their expenditure on killing people, they were able to buy themselves megaphones that enabled them to convince voters to vote for Republican politicians, that enabled votes to be undertaken and people to be appointed to lead the EPA, that reduced the safety of American children and people, and reduced the incidence of, increased the incidence of neurotoxicity related diseases, developmental disorders, as well as carcinogenic associated problems. So you are exposed to carcinogens, you're more likely to get cancer and other types of versions of cancer, such as leukemia. Those are consequences of unethical, misanthropic greed. And misanthropic's a tricky word meaning actively anti-humanity. So yes, pursuit of profit is something that people will sometimes say, that's okay, we don't mind pursuit of profit, because letting people have freedom to pursue profit is what creates jobs for others. So Americans often don't mind the concept of greed. Some people are very opposed to greed conceptually, and others say the pursuit of greed can have tag-along benefits for employees, so they don't mind it, and they will not join you in a coalition of opposition to greed. But they will join you in opposition to misanthropic greed, which pursues profit whilst simultaneously being conscious of harm caused to people. So there you go. Pompeius Magnus says, healthcare is an industry where human contact is essential. And I think in the wake of the pandemic and all of the devastation attendant to the pandemic and the psychological downsides of measures that are taken to contain the pandemic, the social isolation, etc., it will be more evident to people that there is need for workers in the field of psychology and counseling and just helping people connect to their own humanity and the positive sides of that humanity. So Indoor Smoker says he has always paid his employees more than $15 an hour, and if you can do it, then Walmart certainly can. Yes, and a lot of us amateur journalists, we're not churnalists. We don't just churn through information like as if political races are horse races. So amateur journalists have brought more awareness to the fact that Walmart is effectively having its profits subsidized by the American taxpayer, along with other large corporations such as McDonald's, because they underpay their workers. Their workers then require food stamps to be able to literally eat enough food to have the energy to go to work, whilst also maintaining a roof over their heads. And those food stamps are subsidized by are paid for by American taxpayers. So American taxpayers are helping Walmart get away with underpaying their workers. Now, that is not a function of the free market. That is a function of exploited taxpayers who have voted for too many Republican politicians who have voted against raises to the minimum wage so many times that people have become trapped in these cycles of poverty in which they are the working poor. They work for Walmart, they work at McDonald's, but it's not enough to put food on the table for their families, which is a fairly unconscionable set of affairs. I'm sure many people agree once their attention has been drawn to it, that taxpayers are propping up the profit margins and the wealth of these Walmart is a family-owned business, and I don't know if McDonald's is still a family-owned business. I presume it's not. It's been sold on from its original instigator. But in any case, for the profit margins, for the wealth of billionaires to be increased by the output of taxpayers, middle-class taxpayers, contributing to funds to keep alive the underpaid workers of Walmart and McDonald's via food stamps. It's unacceptable. It's a dysfunctional section of the economy. And it's to be hoped that with a Democrat president and a Democratic-controlled Senate and Democratic-controlled House, that change will come. But the resistance to it, I guess, lies with the fact that there are still some senators in Congress who are still so subsumed into that libertarian Republican style ideology of resistance to raising the minimum wage because of the fear that it might upset the apple cart of small businesses and large businesses, that they are resisting it and making it difficult for those measures to pass. Now, if there's government help, maybe for a transition period, whilst the minimum wage is gradually raised, that would be great if it could expedite that timetable of raising the minimum wage so that sooner rather than later, people started to be reimbursed in a way that allowed them to not only feed their family, but exist with a degree of comfort that creates space to be free, freedom to pursue community college in the evenings, freedom to help your children with their homework, and have that parental investment in education, which is a significant predictor of educational success. If your parents take an interest, if they are supportive and positive and engaged with you and what you learn, that is very predictive of you being able to go further with your education and consequently your job prospects. Pitbull Beermaster is also contributing to the disinformation that if you raise minimum wage, it is then compulsory for prices to rise as well. And I've already debunked that by pointing out that in Seattle, where the minimum wage is higher, burgers are still the same price. So what you say is not true and shows a limited understanding of the factors that businesses take into account when they set their prices. Their profits may be larger or smaller, but the prices are fixed by what they think customers will be happy to pay. So no, gas is not related to the minimum wage either. Gas is how can you relate gas prices to the minimum wage? Lordy, gas prices are related to the output in OECD countries and sort of that collaboration between various Middle Eastern countries who produce oil and gas, together with the production output of organic, homegrown oil and gas production as well, because the United States produce oil and gas. Inflation for those prices is completely unrelated to the minimum wage. Ninja Buddha, I'd block you if I could, because you're using dehumanizing language that is one of the rhetorical stepping stones to murder and to mass murder. So everybody who uses that term to refer to human beings, everybody who calls them illegals as if they are not human, but they are the physical embodiment of a broken law, first of all, ignoring that it is not illegal to seek asylum. So you're using Nazi terminology effectively. And I know that not everybody around you will call it Nazi. You're probably surrounded by people who use that terminology. So you think, can't be anything wrong with what I'm doing. Fox does it. Everybody I know does it. We all use the term illegals. It's dehumanizing. Get off this platform. Go grow a heart and read some history and see what happens when people start taking it for granted that it's okay to use dehumanizing language towards people. What's happened in America is the mass murder of people in El Paso because of somebody who viewed migrants and refugees as illegals. Somebody called Pitbull Beermaster, a name which screams credibility, is saying that housing and rent has gone up, just to tell you, in the States. Okay, what are you relating increases in housing to go up by? Are you saying that increases in housing prices, increases in rental prices has gone up in states that have raised the minimum wage, but not in states that haven't raised the minimum wage? Are you trying to argue that there is an effect isolated to wherever minimum wage has increased? Because that's not the case, and your assertions are not based in fact, but your brain circuitry has been activated from overexposure to right-wing disinformation websites. So I'm just one person. I can't be the antidote to all of the legs on your disinformation table. I'm like one little stool and you've got a table with legs, because everything in your brain has confirmed. You heard it from Tucker Carlson, you heard it from Laura Ingraham, you heard it from Sean Hannity. Clearly it's beyond dispute, but you're full of it and they are full of it, and they're actively working and earning their own high salaries from lying to you, and lying to you in a way that compels you to vote against your own interests, to vote for Republicans who protect the wealth of the wealthy, who orchestrate tax cuts for the uber wealthy, and don't vote for relief packages that go to the middle and lower income classes. You're actually going to run for Congress and you actually know people. Well, you're very fond of the word actually, and I'm not going to let you use up all of my attention oxygen. So I can just mute user like that. There you go. Good luck with your run for Congress. But you don't know anything, more broadly speaking. So I don't think you'll succeed unless you're in the right space where everybody around you is paying attention to that same very immersive disinformation stream. Well, I'm going to foreground this comment because it's a compliment. And I'm, as a woman, actively choosing to embrace compliments, and rather than undermine men, to just say, I want that same socialized confidence. I want to be able to embrace the idea that people celebrate what I know or what I contribute. So thank you. Thank you very much for that compliment, indoor smokers. All right. So when Ninja Buddha asked, do you agree with spending $86 million on hotels? That person is showing that they weren't aware, for example, that Trump was purposely increasing the detention of children because you can charge very high rates to the taxpayer, and Trump donors who owned private prison facilities were able to charge the taxpayer $775 a night to take very bad care of children. And when I say very bad care, I mean not supply them with soap or blankets or adequate food, to instead feed them on semi-reheated burritos and undercooked instant noodles. Those were all circumstances reported on by people who were in the facilities run by both the government and by Trump private prison owners who mistreated children to their own significant profit. And children being separated from their parents were then more exposed to the type of abusive, pedophilic people who were attracted to that profession of being guards over migrants, whose very training involved learning to be disparaging of asylum seekers, to call them tonks, to call them names which dehumanize them and made it easier to erode people's socialized instincts not to be cruel, and instead facilitated them to be cruel and abusive, physically aggressive, sexually abusive towards children and teenagers in detention. So there's lots of reporting on that, but I understand there's a large segment of the population that didn't hear any of that reporting because they were closed off to reality via means of the very efficient, very effective right-wing media machine that entraps people in this pseudo-populism whereby Republicans vote against policies that would help people and vote for policies that will help rich people at the expense of the non-rich people. And that what then happens is negative outcomes and closed rural hospitals and hardship and financial hardship. And Republicans then use that hardship to abuse people more and to use their vulnerability to then say, right, you're ripe for being lied to some more because now you're in so much financial and emotional pain that it's harder to think. So we'll just keep telling you more and more vociferously that this is the fault of migrants and people we will call illegals and the fault of Democrats and they're eating babies. And you might be less well off than you wanted to be, but you're morally in the right because those Democrats are killing babies, and you're the only people who want to protect babies. So pseudo-populism, the use of government policy to harm people and then to use the emotional disarray from that harm to expand that vulnerability and to deceive people more into voting for the very people who are harming them in the first place. Pseudo-populism. Learn it because it is very descriptive of Republican management style. James Stanhope, hello, says when Pitbull Beermaster talks about gas prices, he means gasoline, motor fuel, petrol. I know. Yes, not clear how fuel prices affect consumer goods, not clear how fuel prices, gasoline, petrol prices would be in any way, shape or form tied to the minimum wage. So I respectfully suggest he was talking out of his butt, but that he has a level of confidence with his mediocrity that makes him potentially a prime candidate to run for office in a highly Republican area, but not in a purple area where people who are not devoted to voting for Republicans might look a little more askance at his irrational assertions of fact. All right. I am going to go soon, but is there anything else we want to say? Oh, look, there's a face of someone. I can share this on the screen. Someone called Liz Crokin. All right, no, I'm going to have to, that's not the one. Is it very noisy when I click my computer? It probably is. I apologize for that. All right, what I'm just doing is changing which tab I'm showing. All right, so this is the face of someone who's just been told that the 8chan site hosted child pornography alongside Q-drops after she'd spent years using Q-drops to fight child porn. So this woman believed she was instrumental in opposing and fighting trafficking, child trafficking and sex trafficking and child pornography. And now she's found out that the people who owned and operated the 8chan website were using it to promote and sell child pornography themselves. So that would be a pretty special revelation to someone who was previously unaware of that not altogether surprising position of people who talk a lot about how anti-child trafficking they are, but actually are part of it. That's human compartmentalization for you. Often those people are making a very loud noise because on some level they're just trying to rid themselves of their own guilt. I believe the human psychological term is called projection. You're aware of your own guilt, and so you just talk very loudly about the guilt of other people. And that's how you process your feelings. Marsha said hello from Oceanside. Hello, Marsha. And Indoor Smokers said confidence and ignorance are a dangerous combination. Absolutely. All right. There we go. Maybe I'm getting better at this screen transition thing. And how could people ask, how could she not be aware that 8chan simultaneously hosted child pornography as well as Q-drops? And someone points out that there were aggregator sites that conveniently extracted Q drops into a sanitary format. So some people didn't ever go to the 8chan website. And apparently when people were asked why Q would choose the 8chan website for drops, they tended to say that the choice of the site was random and unimportant, etc. Now, other people have done exposés in which they really looked into the people who were involved in doing these mysterious Q drops. And some of them were former military associated people, and that a common factor was their alienation. They had been fired from the military, or they were alienated from their family in some way, and they were using this extra energy they had into promoting and fabricating Q drops to make people feel special, but that would involve enough technically legitimate sounding words that would help feed people's delusion. And that delusion was an interplay between people's yearning for something to believe in, something to help them reconcile their own conscience with the evidence of Trump's con artist nature and proclivities just to steal from people and to hurt children. So they had this emotional yearning to be right. And together with the willingness of ex-military type people to generate plausible sounding cult drops, Q drops, so they could meet in the middle, so that the needy people could meet the exploitative people. And that need, I'm not just going to say need as if there's no judgment attached to it. I am judging their need. Racism and gullibility led them to vote for Trump in the first place. Gullibility to believe that he was a successful businessman and to overlook his pandering to racism, that he from the very beginning made it evident that he wanted, or that he understood the potential of racist psychological energy in the United States, that could be harnessed politically, even though Republicans said, oh, no, overt racism isn't something we do. We're originally going to decry Trump as a candidate. But then once they worked out that, hey, overt racism is not the political liability that it used to be in polite society. Now you can be overtly racist and just say, blah, blah, racist things, but I'm not racist. And that apparently can pass now because there's so many people who are very happy to have a rubber stamp on that racism, and that it's helped. A spoonful of fake billionaire status helps the racism go down. So Trump was able to legitimize his racism with his economic credentials of playing a billionaire on The Apprentice for so long. Bloomberg recently did an expose into Trump's various properties and the levels of debt on them and their estimated value. And it shows that, yeah, Trump, strictly speaking, isn't broke. It's just he has a lot of debt, and his properties have lost a lot of value lately, particularly given the damage to his brand from having incited an insurrection, and also COVID making people work from home more. So his buildings that he owns or part owns are much less able to generate income. They're much less able to lease out office space and business space, and the prices drop, and it just becomes much more difficult for him to pay back his debts and make it more likely that his properties might be foreclosed on by the various banks that have lent him money. So let's see, I can bring up that Bloomberg article because it's got a lot of good graphics that are very clear in their communication. Well, that's a fire alarm. So I might have to evacuate the building. Can you hear? That's quite an exciting noise. Now it has stopped, which might mean that it was a test. I think I am safe. Yeah, it was pretty loud, wasn't it? It stopped though. I think if it was a fire alarm, it would be ongoing. What I might do is just check the message boards. Was that a fire alarm in B3? Oops. James Stanhope is wanting to know how flooding is in my part of Australia and hopes that everybody's safe. I moved away from Australia, so I'm not there right now. There is a lot of flooding on the east coast of Australia. So some bridges are underwater. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure damage. It's going to require a lot of federal expenditure. And Australia still has a mini Trump in power, who's currently struggling with a lot of revelations about sexual assault by people in the government, of alleged sexual assault. So, yes. Oh, yes, and certainly Trump will have lost a lot of income now that taxpayers are no longer paying for Secret Service personnel to stay in rooms on his properties and to hire golf buggies on his properties. I believe some of those rooms were charged to the taxpayer at a rate of $600 a night. And Trump could do that knowing that the people who loved him with an irrational fervor that derived from being validated for being racist. They were told, you're not racist, you're rational. This is just all about putting America first. And so, of course, it's okay to disparage migrants and Mexican migrants, etc. That's just the sensible, logical thing to do. It's not. It's a fascist tapping into in-group, out-group style thinking that felt more logical to people after 9/11 because some people really struggled to accept the fact that the Bush administration fell down with their intelligence services coordination. They fell down on the job of noticing what was happening. It was possible to anticipate planes flying into buildings. There had been chatter about it, etc. It's not that America should suddenly recoil from having migrants. If you tried to unmigrant America, you would have to completely undo its economic success and its social integration, the fact that people have felt so happy to be welcomed into society, even though there are still racism and hate crimes, that a lot of people did feel safe and feel that American communities had this integrity around shared values, that Americans embraced the idea that you could welcome migrants and that they could be free to start businesses. And there was an implicit understanding that Americans benefited from migrants starting businesses. And that truth, that understanding, was undermined by Trumpism, which is why you had elevated instances of hate crimes. People who thought they were acting out as soldiers in a war against interlopers and invaders and unwanted guests. Because they were encouraged to fundamentally misconstrue the role of migrants in American society. They were encouraged to see themselves as the owner of a house, and that the door was open and guests kept coming in. And the Democrats were keeping that door open, and these guests were just messing up the house. Whereas a better analogy for what happens in America is you have a community center and people come in and start planting a lot more things in the community garden. So there's a lot more vegetables, and yes, the people who've helped plant them take some of the vegetables, but they grow so much food that everybody in the community is getting more food and more nutritious food. That's a better analogy for how America works than this analogy of, no, white people are like the individual home owners and they are the authentic Americans, and migrants are these guests. And then if they break anything, you have to just say, well, clearly we shouldn't have any guests anymore because one migrant has committed a crime. So that just is therefore a data point to tell us no more migrants. And look, we've got a veteran, we've got grandma, so we have to help them. So we can't allow migrants to come into the country because it takes social services expenditure to help migrants integrate initially. So we can't do any of that because we've got a veteran sleeping on our sofa and grandma needs a new wheelchair. So we can't help you. That analogy is all misguided, has the wrong end of the stick, and fundamentally denies the positive contribution of migrants and the role that migrants have played in helping employ Americans, in helping start businesses, in helping lift American educational standards, providing more people to compete with, more drive, more positive energy, more innovation, more Nobel Prize winners, more science, more excellence. So I hope that all makes sense. And that's probably going to be my concluding remarks for the day. I wonder if I used software which took some of my remarks from its verbal form and translated that into the written word, and I put that up on a website. Would any of you be interested in visiting that? I already have a website, but I don't put anything on it much. It's davcat43.com. But if I was able to take some of my spoken content and put it in written form, would that be of interest to anybody? Because I'm thinking the interesting part about that is I could tag in websites and links to articles that I've read that have helped me form my understanding of the key contribution of migrants to American prosperity, and the link that people have highlighted between use of dehumanizing language and subsequent hate crimes. Because a lot of people hear the hate speech, and then the people on the margins of sanity are more likely to then make use of gun availability, as did the mass murderer in Georgia, Robert Aaron Young, who was able to straight away obtain a weapon, didn't have to have any waiting period. Waiting periods are associated with a 16% reduction in gun crimes, which does not eliminate gun crimes, but a lot of people would say it's worth attacking that problem from multiple angles to bring down the level of gun crime in America, to not just have to put up with it, to not be numbed to the pain of living in a society in which these crimes are frequent and common and disruptive to the lives of school children, who then have to do, or who are then subject to the end product of community concern about gun crimes. So then there's political pressure for schools to have drills all the time, whereby children have to emotionally rehearse what it would be like to be running for your life or hiding for your life from someone with a gun hunting you as if you were an animal to be shot in a hunt. So I haven't had any comments for a little while, but I will say it's been a pleasure talking to you all, as always. Thank you particularly to Marsha and to Indoor Smokers and to James. Thank you for your engagement and contribution. And I hope to talk to you again soon. I will be back on broadcasting tomorrow. I think I've been starting to get to bed a little bit earlier, so you haven't seen that yet transpire in my broadcasting times, but I've got 8 more days to try and make that behavioral link, so that when I'm just broadcasting from HAPS and not Periscope, that I'm very reliable with a broadcast time. And of course, in June, my family are still planning to move to Massachusetts. So there's the idea that it will be easier for me then to broadcast at a time at which Americans are more likely to be awake. Oh, yes, and Donald as well. Donald subscribed today. Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Marsha. All the best, everybody. Take care. Watch out for those COVID variants, and don't forget to mention Brazil if you're around COVID denialists who want to say, hey, look, clearly we've beaten COVID and it's all finished, so let's all throw away our masks. It's not time to throw away masks yet. The population is not vaccinated. Even if vaccination isn't perfect against all of the variants, it will still significantly decrease the ability of the virus to be transmitted. But it is a race against time, because you want to use that vaccine to have enough broad-scale adoption of the vaccine to reduce the spread of COVID before the other variants become endemic as well. So good luck. I know everybody's on that journey together, and that there's still this idea that 14 different Republican governors are relaxing measures in a precipitous way, in a way that's too early, almost as if they're trying to sabotage the Biden administration in their efforts to safeguard the American people and the American economy. James Stanhope says, Massachusetts, interesting destination. My husband got a job there, so congratulations to him. He needs to have a job because his wife is not the bestest at generating income, but I hope to find a way forward at some point. I have the qualifications that should enable me to earn a decent wage and contribute to supporting our family. But for the time being, my husband's income is certainly adequate, and hopefully I can move into a sphere where I have an actual job and not just a compulsion to help Americans and people on the internet interested in truth. Hopefully I can find some way to be a self-respecting working woman who doesn't just have a volunteer hobby job. But I'm thinking, because my qualifications lie in the area of speech. My background is in linguistics, speech pathology, and that maybe if I start offering my services for free as a speech coach to help parents in particular just gain confidence in facilitating language development for their children, or for adults who have any speech impediments such as a stutter, that I could just be someone who worked with them to help them overcome obstacles to confident functioning in the real world. Marsha says, I will have a wonderful job. Thank you, Marsha. I do look forward to moving to the States. I think there is some promise there for me, given my focus on the States and its politics and its socio-political dynamics, that I might find something that's a good fit. I love your confidence, Marsha. So Marsha, Donald, James, indoor smokers, thank you all, and talk to you again soon. Bye. Bye, everybody.